Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination, but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler. The nights are long, the days are short, and the weather is chilly to downright cold, depending on where you are. It's a good time to slip into a Quince iconic Mongolian cashmere sweaters, which start at only $50. You can treat yourself to everyday luxury at an affordable price with Quince. If you really want to dive into luxury, you can check out their leather handbags, washable silk shirts, and European linen sheet sets. Whatever you're looking for at Quince, all the prices are 50 to 80% less than similar brands, and they do that by partnering directly with top factories and cutting out the middleman. They only work with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing processes. And of course, they use premium fabrics and finishes for that luxury feel in every piece. But you've already heard me rave about my Quince travel pants. Treat yourself this winter without the luxury price tag. Go to quince.com/traveler for 365-day returns plus free shipping on your order. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo.
Amateur Traveler, episode 657. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about Jane Austen, Charles Dickens, Neolithic stones, Georgian England, and Roman baths as we go to Bath in England. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. Let's talk about Bath, England. I'd like to welcome to the show Karen Warren from worldwidewriter.co.uk, who's come to talk to us about Bath in England. Karen, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me on the show.
Excellent. And first of all, what is your relationship with Bath?
Right, I actually am currently living in Bath. I moved here about 6 months ago. And before I moved here, I'd only ever been here 2 or 3 times. But it just looked like a good place to live. And I've been quite overwhelmed with what I've seen since I've been here.
Well, and it's been a popular place for about 2,000 years, as we'll get into
in a
bit. But why should someone come to Bath? To visit, not necessarily to live?
Well, first thing, the whole town is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is a bit of a clue that it's quite an amazing place. The Romans used to come here for their summer holidays 2,000 years ago because of the amazing hot springs. We've probably got the best preserved Roman baths in the world. And quite apart from that, it's also an amazing Georgian town associated with Jane Austen, if you're a literature lover. Lots and lots of amazing architecture. But we've also got museums, gardens, lots of restaurants, pubs, etc. And we're surrounded by some quite amazing countryside and lots of things to do.
Excellent. And in terms of itinerary, you're going to recommend we go to Bath, obviously, and then a few things outside of Bath?
That's right, yes. I think if someone were to come here for a week, they'd probably spend 3 or 4 days in the town itself and 3 or 4 days going to places outside the town. You could actually spend a month going to places outside the town. Guessing most of your listeners won't be coming for months, so we have to limit ourselves a bit.
Well, and what we usually do is you listen to 2 shows if you've got a 2-week itinerary. We can solve that. In fact, we're recording another show on the UK just later next week, so there's always going to be more places to go. Excellent. Well, where should we start?
I think the first place you have to start is the Roman baths, because that's where it all started. Yeah, that the Romans came to Bath because of the natural hot springs. And what we've got in Bath is the Roman baths, which unfortunately you can't bathe in anymore, but the water's still there. You can see the steam. And what happened was in the 18th century, the baths were resurrected, and you've got some new Georgian-style buildings around the baths. So you can explore the baths, you can explore the old Roman remains around the baths, which is really interesting. And next to the baths, you've got the pump room, which is for fans of Jane Austen. That's where all Jane Austen's characters used to go and meet each other and drink the water, and then they go through to the baths. And you can still go in the pump room today and have lunch or afternoon tea. I've done that myself, and it's extremely nice.
And I would have to say I have read some Jane Austen. I am not a Jane Austen expert. I can't recall. So which characters in which book would we be reenacting here by going to the pump room?
It's a good question. I'm just working my way through rereading Jane Austen at the moment. But basically, all of her books have parts which are set in Bath, or characters who go to Bath. The ones really where people spend a lot of time in Bath are Northanger Abbey. Quite a lot of that takes place in Bath, and you actually have people going to the pump room and go to the assembly rooms, which I will talk to you about in a minute. But it was very much a sort of fashionable sort of place.
So this is Georgian England, so we're talking the late 1800s.
So it would be 1700s.
Oh, sorry.
Jane was writing in the late 1700s.
I have to ask, does one decide to reread Jane Austen and then move to Bath, or does one move to Bath and then decide that they have to reread Jane Austen?
It's a good question. I've done it. I've moved to Bath and then realised I had to reread Jane Austen. I read them all when I was at school, and I never planned to read them again, but I'm very pleased to be rereading them because there is so much in them that relates to Bath. And when I talk to you a bit about the architecture in Georgian Bath, then that will come out. But just before I stop talking about the springs, I was going to say there are some, what they call the Thermy Bath Spa, where you can actually have a spa experience in the natural hot springs, which is something which I think quite a lot of people might like to do.
And when we were visiting the bathhouse, were we doing that independently, or do we need to be a tour on that?
If you go to the Thermy Bath Spa, you can pre-book as a group, or you can go on your own, but I think you might have to queue. So you might do better to book it. There is also a hotel called the Grosvenor Hotel, which has a spa on the springs. Now, that might be a better place for an individual person to go. I think you might find it easier to get in there.
Okay. And when we say the Grosvenor Hotel, is that spelled the incomprehensible British way?
It is. It is indeed.
With like an S in there that you're not saying? Okay. Grosvenor. Okay.
That's right.
Excellent. I interrupted you. You were taking us to the springs that we were going in.
I think people could spend a day going to the baths, and maybe while you're in the baths, you can have a wander around the outside of the Abbey and the Abbey courtyards, which are sort of the medieval bit of Bath. You can go into the baths and then go into the pump room for your lunch and then go to the spa. And that would probably be quite a nice day. I'm told, although I've not done it myself, that if you go to the actual spa, they have a rooftop bit. It's supposed to be very nice at sunset.
Ah, okay. Well, and you mentioned Roman, now medieval, and Georgian, which I put in the wrong century. But so Bath has been continuously occupied since Roman times. And I hope by now people have figured out the name is not any great secret where it gets its name.
That's right.
We have a sharp audience. I think they picked up on that right away. Excellent. Well, where should we go next?
Okay, I think the next thing you have to do is Georgian Bath.
Okay.
And probably the place to start there would be the Jane Austen Centre, which is not actually a house that Jane Austen lived in, but it's in the same road where
Okay.
Jane Austen lived, so it's a very similar house. So that's been made into a museum, and they have all the staff are dressed up as characters from Jane Austen novels, and you walk around, and so you see the sort of house she would have stayed in when she was in Bath, and you find out about her life and a bit about her works. The museum's actually got a tea room upstairs if you want to have sort of traditional English tea. I think we like traditional English tea here. There's a few places you can get it.
So that's with the little sandwiches without crusts and in the middle of the afternoon, cakes. Oh, don't forget the cakes.
Although,
yes.
as I said when I went to the Jane Austen Centre, Jane Austen's characters would not have had afternoon tea that week because it hadn't been invented then. But
Is that true? I did not know that.
even tea, apparently, so if I could go off at a tangent, in Jane Austen's time, tea was a very valuable commodity, and each house had a housekeeper who had the key to the tea chest, so it couldn't be stolen. Hard to imagine now, isn't it? But
Well, and English tea, like when we think of Earl Grey tea, that was just a way of cutting the tea with local ingredients to save on the price.
do you know, I didn't know that, but it
Yep.
does sound right, yes.
About 50% of Earl Grey would have been local ingredients, and then 50% would have been that expensive tea coming from China.
Right, interesting. Yes, that makes sense. Yes. So, when you've been to the Jane Austen Centre, you can walk through the streets of Georgian England. You go up Gay Street, which is where the Jane Austen Centre is. You come to the Circus, which is a round, very hard to describe without a photograph, but it's basically grand Georgian houses in a circle. And that's where obviously a lot of rich visitors to Bath came. And then you go a bit further up and you get to the Royal Crescent, which is probably the grandest address in Bath, both in Jane Austen's time and today. And near to there is the Assembly Rooms. The Assembly Rooms is where people in the 18th century, probably 19th century as well, they would go there for balls, and they would have rooms for gambling and rooms for eating. And it's basically where you went for your formal occasions to meet people.
Okay.
So, when I talk about the pump room, that's where you go for your everyday socialising. And the Assembly Rooms is where you went for your more formal events. And there's two other things you'd probably want to do is say, if you had time, you could maybe take in one or two small museums. I think I mentioned that Bath's full of museums. When you get up to the Royal Crescent, the first house there, number 1, the Crescent, is actually a museum. And that's set out as a grand house would have looked back in the 18th century. And that's one museum, something people like to take in. There's also a small museum of architecture which actually talks to you about the design and building of all the Georgian buildings. But there's lots more small museums, but they're just two that I've sort of picked out. The other thing is, as you're walking around, it's worth knowing that although we talk about Jane Austen, Bath's actually associated with lots of other writers. Charles Dickens stayed here a bit later than Jane Austen's time, of course, but he's one of the important writers who came here again. Pickwick Papers, if you're familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a scene in Bath, and Sheridan, who was a 18th century playwright, came here. Fawcett a Duel, even in Bath. Quite a lot of literary associations, which, if you're interested in that, it's worth looking out. Loads and loads of plaques. As you're walking around on the buildings, there are plaques everywhere saying so-and-so stays here. And all sorts of people, not just writers, but I saw one today, which I've not seen before, that Lord Nelson stayed in this house. So it's very much the sort of place where you walk around and you look at all the plaques, you look at all the buildings, and there's just a lot to discover.
Excellent.
What I thought was you could do on another day is have a look at the other side of if you imagine Bath has the centre, which was the old Roman stroke medieval centre. Then you've got the new Georgian town. But then, of course, the Georgian town spread over to the other side because there were more and more people coming and more building. So if you go to the Victoria Art Gallery, which is actually a Victorian building, but yeah, it's a nice art gallery. It's a good place to spend a little bit of time. And then you can walk over the Portney Bridge, which is a Georgian bridge across the river.
Mhm.
Now, that's a very interesting bridge. It's built to a Palladian design, and it's one of only 4 bridges in the world that's got shops on both sides. Yeah, a bit like the Ponte Vecchio in Florence, if you're familiar with it. But so that's a very nice bridge. And if you walk across that bridge, you can, straight ahead of you, you have Great Portney Street, which is a grand Georgian street with big houses on both sides. And right at the end, you have the Holborn Museum, which was a hotel in late 18th century, and then it later became an art gallery. And at the back of the Holborn Museum is the Sydney Gardens, which are the oldest gardens in the city, and they were what was called a Vauxhall Pleasure Garden, which is a very 18th century thing. They built these big parks that people could go in. They pay so much money, you go in and you'd have big events with fireworks and whatever, or you could just go and walk through the gardens. And Jane Austen, on one of her visits to Bath, actually stayed near the gardens, used to go walking through the gardens every day. So that's a really nice place to go and have a walk. So basically that day you've got 2 museums in the gardens and a bit of wandering around.
Okay. Excellent. Are there more things that you want to do in Bath before we head out? Excellent.
I've got another whole day in Bath.
Well, and one question for you is, we talked about walking around Bath. I see that the mayor has volunteer guides who will do a free walking tour. Do you recommend that, or are there other tours that you would recommend for those who want to get a little more detail?
I've not done them myself, but they get very good reviews. And basically, the mayor has volunteers and people meet outside the Abbey, and these volunteers take you around Bath and show you, obviously they're local people, so they can show you all sorts of interesting things. And there's no charge for these, so I would definitely recommend that people try them. They are, from what I can gather, very popular.
And my impression was, and I don't know if I've got this right, that you just need to show up.
That's right. You don't have to book. You just turn up.
Okay. Well, that's easy. And it looks like there's a sign right outside the cathedral with the hours for when the walking tours are, and that they're twice a day most days, 3 times a day on Tuesdays and Sundays.
There is a website
for
Tuesdays
and Fridays. Yep. Excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
Konnichiwa, I'm Yuki, a tour leader with Explore. Who knew that hidden among Tokyo's towering skyscrapers was a peaceful tea house surrounded by ancient trees and serene ponds? Actually, I knew. It was my mother's secret sanctuary. Not everyone knows about Tokyo's Hamarikyu Gardens. Arigatou gozaimasu. But you will if you explore. Search exploreworldwide.com. And don't just travel. Explore.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
So my last day in Bath, I thought probably people might like to do what's called the Skyline Tour. Now, if you imagine Bath is in a valley, the River Avon goes through a very deep valley, and Bath's on the bottom of the valley and then climbing up the sides, which means that if you get up onto the top of the valley, you get amazing views of the whole of Georgian Bath down in the bottom of the valley. So it's a thing called the Skyline Tour, which is a 6-mile tour, and basically starts at the centre, goes up the hill and round and down again. And it's designed as a walking trail in the hills. It's about 6 miles. It's better if you like walking up hills because we do have hills in Bath. But if you're up for a walk, that was a really nice thing to do. And if you don't want to walk, there is a hop-on, hop-off bus that does the route, and you can get off at various places. Now, there's a couple of places on the route, whether you walk it or whether you go on the bus. One is right up at the very top, there's the American Museum, which is a really nice museum because it's full of American quilts and American history, or American history from 1492 anyway. And it's got fabulous gardens, really nice gardens on the hillside. So I definitely recommend people stop there. And then when you come back down again, you go past Prior Park, which is a 18th century garden, partly designed by Capability Brown and partly designed by the poet Alexander Pope, who had a bit of a sideline in designing grand gardens. So that's really a really interesting place to stop as well. That is probably quite a good way to end your visit in Bath. You're actually doing the skyline and stopping at those two places on the way round.
Excellent. Well, and before we move off of Bath, you're recommending an American museum in England to an American, which
I am.
Which
yes,
hurts my head a little bit. But are there other museums that you would recommend in Bath? You mentioned there are quite a few, and I see you are correct.
That's right. We do have lots.
Are there other ones that you were particularly fond of, big or little?
I think I probably mentioned my favourite ones. I mean, we have some very niche museums. Like there's one is
I saw a fashion museum, for instance.
The Masonic Museum, for instance.
Interesting.
Or there's a postal museum. Now, some of them are very small. You sort of get round them in half an hour, but they are quite interesting. If you're interested in the subject, there are, as I say, lots of them.
Okay. And then there are others that are some of the manor houses that have been turned into museums as well, I see. And so if you're interested in Jane Austen or Brideshead Revisited or whatever, that kind of lifestyle, we might head out to one of those.
That's right.
Excellent. And then one other things before we leave the city that I did want to give a mention of. We talked about Georgia and England and that Bath regains popularity. I did want to give credit that it actually started with Princess, later Queen Anne's visit to take the waters way back in 1702 and 1703. It predates Georgia just a little bit, but not very much. And then obviously all this rebuilding that starts at that time.
That's right. Although, in fact, if I to quibble,
please quibble.
Probably go back a little bit further back than that, because there was a 17th century physician, a doctor who actually discovered the health-giving or supposed health-giving properties of the water, which is why Queen Anne went. That's right. Yes.
Excellent. So we're heading out of town. Where are we going?
There are lots and lots of places, but I thought for the first day you could go out to Bradford-on-Avon, which is about 8 miles away, and it's a medieval town, and it's a bit like Bath in the sense that it's in a valley and on the sides of a hill. Very compact, and it's full of things like a medieval tithe barn, very old Saxon church. Mm-hmm. If you climb up the hill, there's a medieval chapel, which is an old pilgrim chapel, which is really interesting. So it's full of just things to see, wander around and just to enjoy being there. It's got some old pubs, quite a nice tea room, and also you can walk along the river or along the canal. So that would be really nice half day. You could get to Bradford-on-Avon either by the train or by car.
Okay.
You've got the choice. But if you want to do what I'm going to suggest next, then you probably need to take a car, because what I'm going to suggest for the rest of your day is that you go to Laycock. Now, Laycock's a small town with an abbey, and it's kept very much as it would have been in probably the 18th or 19th century. As in fact, if you've ever seen any films or English period dramas, you've probably seen Laycock, because in fact I've noticed that every time I watch a period drama I'm saying, oh yeah, that's Laycock, because that's where everything's filmed, because it's actually kept very much as it was, so that people can go and make their films there. So that's a really interesting place. Certainly if you've seen the Harry Potter films, some of those bits are filmed around Laycock. Basement of the Abbey is where they have their potions lessons. So that's really interesting.
Interesting.
I was going to say either Laycock or Bradford could be a day themselves, but if you've only got a week, you probably try to hire a car and get them both in at the same time.
Okay.
The next day I was going to suggest, I'm being controversial here, because I think the tour operators, the conventional wisdom is that if you're staying in Bath, they say, well, go down to Stonehenge.
Sure.
Whereas I'd say, no, don't go down to Stonehenge because it's very crowded and very busy. And basically, you look at the stones and you say, well, okay, they look just like all the pictures I've seen of Stonehenge. So that's not very interesting. So
I would defend Stonehenge, that I enjoyed seeing Stonehenge, but it what you're saying is true. It is very busy. I do think it's more attractive now that they've kind of hidden the car park and some of that.
yes,
but
that's true. But you can see it from the road just driving past.
Okay.
Okay. What I'd say is go to Avebury.
Okay. Which does not get the crowds. Yeah.
It doesn't get the crowd. I mean, it's busy, but it's not like Stonehenge. You don't pay to look at the stones. The stone circle, though it's not complete, it is a double stone circle.
Bigger circle with smaller stones.
Yeah, it's an old Neolithic stone circle.
Yeah.
But also, the reason I recommend Avebury, quite apart from all that, is that you've got so much more, because from the circle, you've got the old processional avenue, which is 2 lines of stones.
Okay.
And then you've got the West Kennet Long Barrow, which is a burial place.
Oh.
And you've also got, I don't know if you've heard of it, a place called Silbury Hill. And I can't tell you what it is because nobody knows what it is, but it's artificial, massive chalk mounds covered in grass.
Huh.
Which is just dead weird. So that's really interesting. And assuming you've hired a car to go there, you could, if you didn't mind it being a long day, drive a bit further up to the Uffington White Horse. I don't know if you know about the white horses that we have carved into the hillsides.
Oh, yeah.
There are lots of them around here.
Okay.
And the Uffington White Horse is a logical one to go to if you go to Avebury. And not far from there is a thing called the Wayland Smithy, which is another Neolithic burial place. Wayland Smithy is quite interesting because if you look hard enough, Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, has signed his name on a, I'm not sure if it's a tree or a stone, but his signature's around there somewhere anyway. So that's just a bit interesting.
Well, and I just want to put this in a little perspective. When you say go much further or a longer day, so Avebury and Silbury Hill are about an hour, a little over an hour from Bath. So
yes.
We're not talking about what I would consider a long drive where I live.
Yes, long drive by English terms.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd say definitely do that rather than Stonehenge, but that's up to people what they want to choose. Okay.
I appreciate your opinion on this, and I think that it's interesting to hear about the other things that we don't hear about other than the big tours. Cool. Excellent.
And my last suggested day is that you get a car and go out and see some of the vineyards and cider farms. Now, vineyards are sort of fairly new here. Yeah, it's only the last few years that people have been planting vines on a big scale. In fact, most of our vineyards are pretty small still, but they are there. So I think it'd be really interesting actually to go out to some of them. Yeah, so if you drive out to the vineyard, you probably need to book in advance with most of them. They're not too keen on you just turning up.
That is an odd thing to me about Europe is still getting around to what we're used to here, which is they very much want you to just turn up, and they have tasting rooms and tours and things. And that is more popular in places in Europe now than it used to be. But 20 years ago, nobody in Europe seemed to do it.
That's
except
right.
for maybe Epernay in France. But
yeah, I think the reason is that they're still mostly very small. And they probably couldn't cope with a whole lot of people descending on them all at once. So because they've only got a few members of staff and so much space in their tasting room, if they had too many people, they'd be just turning people away. So I think that's probably the reason. But I was having a look today. I discovered that there is actually vineyards about 4 miles from Bath, which you probably could get to by bus. Which, if people didn't want to drive, so that's a possibility. And you could do a tour and a tasting, which is quite a nice thing to do. More traditional for this area than wine is cider.
Okay, and I didn't realize this was an apple or therefore cider region.
It's a big cider region.
Okay.
And you can either go to a cider farm and buy cider to take back and drink in your hotel or whatever, or there are some places where you can actually do a bit more. And I found a place near Bristol, about 20 miles away, where you can actually go and have a tour and see what they do and buy the cider and taste the cider. So that's quite a nice thing to do as well.
Okay. And we should say, so Bristol is the other direction. Bristol would be west while Avebury was east, but it's less than an hour, probably half an hour from
it's no distance at all. Yeah, very, very close.
And we do have another episode on Bristol, which will overlap a little bit with this one if you're interested in more about this region and have more than a week, for instance. Excellent. Is there a particular cidery you would recommend?
Can't recommend from personal experience,
Okay.
but I was doing a bit of research, and there's one called the Cider Myrtle Farm. Myrtle spelled Myrtle,
Okay.
which is near Bristol. That's about 20 miles from Bath, that one.
Excellent. And I have to ask, since we've been talking Jane Austen and Bath, if you have a favorite Jane Austen novel.
My favourite Jane Austen novel is Emma.
Okay.
Because I've read it lots of times. I just like Emma. I think she's good.
If that was somebody else's favorite, where would you recommend they go that they will appreciate more because they've read that book?
The funny thing is, you've got me there, because it's the only book where the main characters don't actually go to Bath. One of the minor characters does go off to Bath, but he doesn't tell you where he goes. So
Okay.
if you look at your other books, if you say Northanger Abbey, you would have to go to the assembly rooms, because that's where things happen. Yeah, that's where people meet each other. And if you look at Northanger Abbey, and Catherine Morland goes up to the assembly rooms and she meets Henry Tilney for the first time.
Okay. Excellent. Other things we want to do in the region around Bath, or we wrapped up your itinerary here?
I think we've wrapped up the itinerary. As I say, there's loads more you could do. I mean, I haven't mentioned any of the country houses, for instance. There's lots of big houses with gardens, which you could do. There's lots of just nice countryside, little villages. Drive out to a village, have a pub lunch.
Well, and unless you have a month, you're not going to go to all the country houses in the area.
Are
there one or two that you would recommend?
A place called Stour Head, which is probably, I'm not quite sure how far it is, but that's definitely a really nice house with really nice gardens, which I would recommend.
Excellent. And then you mentioned the one hike that we were going to do around Bath. Any other outdoor activities? Because I see we're in near two different forest areas, one in Bath and one over by Avebury. Any other outdoor activities you would recommend in the area?
I don't know. I'll tell you what I wouldn't recommend. I wouldn't recommend getting a bike because it's too hilly.
Okay. Yeah, I noticed that road to Avebury, you have to be able to like windy roads, it looks like, to drive.
That's right. Two things which I have noticed. One is the canal boats. People do take boats out, and there are locks and whatever, so it's quite nice out on the canals. And the other thing that's usually ever so popular, I'm not sure if it counts as outdoor activity, but a lot of people go over in hot air balloons.
Okay. Excellent. Is that from Bath itself?
I think so. I don't know where you get them from, but I see so many going over that I think it must be.
Okay. Excellent. And in terms of the canal boating, we obviously just did an episode of Amateur Traveler. You haven't heard it yet. The listeners probably have, on canal boating in France, down in the Canal de Midi. But we've also done one a number of years ago on narrow boating in England and Wales. So if you're interested in, if the canal boating sounded all interesting in England, go listen to that episode. A couple wrap-up questions for you. You're standing in the prettiest spot in Bath or the region. Where are you standing? What are you looking at?
Well, I think probably you're looking at the Pulteney Bridge and the weir. Pulteney Bridge is the one I said with the shops on either side. And in front of it is a weir and all the water tumbling down, and then there's the parade gardens next to that. So I think that's a really nice spot.
Dam, for those people who don't speak English. Okay. Excellent. One thing that makes you laugh and say only in Bath.
I always laugh when I see lots and lots and lots of French school children running around and really enjoying the place. I don't know if that counts.
And why particularly do French school children come to Bath on holiday?
I don't know. I've puzzled over that because they have lots of Roman remains themselves, but
Right,
I suspect
sure.
it is the Roman baths that attract people because, as I say, I suspect it probably is the best preserved Roman baths anywhere, anywhere that you can see. That's the most likely reason.
Excellent. Our guest again has been Karen Warren from worldwidewriter.co.uk. And Karen, if we wanted to send somebody to your best post on the region, where are we going to send them?
I'd like to send them to my post on Literary Bath,
Well, that makes sense. Okay.
which tells you about all sorts of people, not just Jane Austen, but Charles Dickens and all sorts of other people who've been associated with the city. I think that would be a quite nice one for people to look at.
Excellent. And as always, that will be a link both in the show notes over at amateurtraveler.com as well as in the lyrics of this episode. If you open up the lyrics, you'll see the links to everything we talked about, including Karen's post. Karen, thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Bath.
And thank you.
I heard from Eric this week, who is a listener of the show, but recently found the blog, the amateurtraveler.com blog, that is. He wrote and said, I should have been reading your blog, not just listening to your podcast. We just booked our first Airbnb. Oh, well. And he said that because he just saw that there was a $40 coupon for your first Airbnb stay, and he missed it because he wasn't reading the blog. Don't be like Eric. At least he's discovered it now. You can also get opportunities by getting on the mailing list. You can see that at amateurtraveler.com also. Jeff Olfs, who was a guest on the show talking about Joshua Tree National Park and the former chief ranger from Joshua Tree, wrote me an email to school me recently. We had mentioned on the episode I did with Gary Arndt talking about Alaska National Parks that national grasslands are designated in the National Park Service. And he says, no, they are actually U.S. Forest Service. I defer to Jeff's superior national park knowledge. Also, we said Indiana Dunes was being redesignated a national park from a national lakeshore. As Gary mentioned, it is not an upgrade. All designations are treated the same. They follow the same laws, policy, and regulations except for two: preserves and recreation areas. In 1972, Congress stated that in the Redwoods Act amendment that all national park units are created equal, despite the designation they may have been given. Sorry, I'm just a fallacy I was trying to put to bed. Jeff, thanks so much. And we're going to have Jeff back on the show sometime, probably talking about California state parks here in the next couple months. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And if you'd like to get more of these episodes, please do subscribe in Apple Podcasts or wherever you found this podcast. And thanks so much for listening.
Got to see one more cathedral.